Someone remove that filth from my house immediately. Conrad Blackwood's voice cut through the elegant murmur of the charity gala like a blade. This is a fundraiser for the arts, not a soup kitchen. The crystal champagne flute in his hand caught the light from the chandelier as he pointed it toward the entrance of his ballroom, where a thin boy of perhaps 12 stood frozen in terror. The child's clothes, layers of mismatched items clearly salvaged from donation bins, hung from his frame like flags on a windless day. His feet, partially visible beneath frayed pant legs, were bare, filthy, and bleeding from fresh cuts. 500 of Manhattan's elite turned as one to stare, their judgment crystallizing in the sudden silence. The string quartet faltered briefly before continuing their Vivaldi, providing an obscenely elegant soundtrack to the boy's humiliation. "I said remove him," Conrad repeated, irritation sharpening his already cutting tone. "Martinez, what do we pay security for if not to keep vermin outside where they belong?" From his corner of the ballroom, 8-year-old Ethan Blackwood watched the scene unfold with unblinking intensity, his hands motionless in his lap. Unlike the other guests who quickly averted their eyes from the uncomfortable spectacle, Ethan missed nothing. His father had called his deafness a defect since birth, but it had given him something others lacked: the ability to see what people did when they thought no one was watching. And right now, he was watching Lucia Mendez, who had been his father's housekeeper for as long as Ethan could remember, who taught him sign language when his father insisted on speech therapy alone, who left small drawings under his pillow on nights when his father's disappointment felt heaviest. Lucia, who now set down her tray of champagne flutes with deliberate care and moved toward the homeless boy while security approached from the opposite direction. She reached him first. With fluid grace that belied her 58 years, Lucia knelt before the terrified child, her dark uniform pooling around her on the marble floor. She made no attempt to remove him. Instead, she gently took one of his bleeding feet in her hands, examining it with the careful attention of a nurse. The boy remained frozen, like a wild animal uncertain whether to flee or surrender. "Lucia," Conrad's voice lashed across the ballroom. "What do you think you're doing?" She ignored him completely, an act of defiance so unexpected that a collective inhale swept through the crowd. No one ignored Conrad Blackwood. Not staff, not business partners, certainly not the help. From his vantage point, Ethan saw his father's face darken to a dangerous crimson. But more importantly, he saw what no one else noticed: the subtle movements of Lucia's hands as she placed the boy's foot down and began to sign. "Underscore water," underscore her fingers asked. "Underscore are you thirsty?" Underscore the boy stared in confusion. With patient grace, Lucia took his small hands in hers and shaped them into the sign for water, then pointed to her throat, mimicking drinking. Understanding dawned on the boy's face. He copied the gesture clumsily, nodding with desperate eagerness. And that's when Ethan slid from his chair. He moved through the crowd like a ghost, unnoticed as always. The benefits of being invisible in his father's world. By the time Conrad spotted him, Ethan was already halfway across the ballroom, his custom-tailored suit a miniature reflection of his father's. "Ethan," Conrad called reflexively, then caught himself, a habit he'd never broken despite 8 years of his son's deafness. Ethan continued toward Lucia and the boy, his determined steps drawing the attention of every guest. He stopped before them, small hands emerging from his pockets to form fluid signs. Underscore I'll help him. Underscore Lucia's eyes widened slightly, not at the words themselves, but at Ethan signing openly before his father's guests. Conrad had forbidden it, insisting his son use the speech therapy he'd paid a fortune for, regardless of how painful and difficult. Ethan found it. The homeless boy watched Ethan's hands with fascination. When Ethan repeated the sign for water, the boy copied it again, more confidently this time. A crystal silence fell across the ballroom as Conrad crossed the marble floor with measured steps, his smile fixed in place for the benefit of watching donors. He reached for Ethan's shoulder, fingers digging in with warning pressure. "Son, return to your seat. Security will handle this situation." Ethan shrugged away from his father's grip and signed to Lucia. Underscore his feet are bleeding. He needs help. Underscore Conrad's smile stretched thinner. "Ethan, we've discussed this. Use your words when we have guests." For the first time that evening, perhaps for the first time in years, Ethan looked directly into his father's eyes. Then, with deliberate slowness, he signed, underscore, I am using my words. You just don't want to understand them. Underscore, a shocked murmur rippled through the watching crowd. The homeless boy, sensing the tension, began to back away, but Ethan caught his sleeve gently. With his free hand, he signed, underscore, stay. Please, underscore. What happened next would be discussed in Manhattan's social circles for months to come. Without breaking eye contact with his father, Ethan removed his handcrafted Italian leather shoes, $5,000, custom-made to match his father's, and offered them to the homeless boy. That's enough, Conrad hissed, his public mask slipping. You're embarrassing yourself. Embarrassing me. Ethan's response was to remove his silk socks as well, standing barefoot on the cold marble in silent solidarity. From her kneeling position, Lucia watched this exchange with an expression Conrad couldn't quite identify. Something between pride and sorrow, tinged with another emotion that looked uncomfortably like pity. Not for the homeless child or for Ethan, but for Conrad himself. Mr. Blackwood, she said, breaking her silence at last, her accent more pronounced under stress. Perhaps we should move this conversation somewhere private. There's nothing to discuss, Conrad snapped. Remove this vagrant, and we'll deal with your insubordination later. The homeless boy flinched at Conrad's tone, though he couldn't have understood the words. Ethan noticed, stepping closer to him protectively. And then, with the unpracticed clumsiness of a beginner, the homeless boy raised his hands and signed a single word he'd just seen Ethan use. Underscore, please. Underscore. Something shifted in the atmosphere of the glittering ballroom. A collective recognition that they were witnessing something significant, though few could have articulated what. In the heavy silence, Lucia stood, placing herself between Conrad and the two boys. His name is Gabriel, she said quietly. And he is not a vagrant, Mr. Blackwood. She paused, her gaze steady despite the risk she was taking. He is your brother's son. The words landed like a physical blow. Conrad's face drained of color as he stared at the boy, really looking at him for the first time, and saw the unmistakable Blackwood features beneath the grime and fear. That's not possible, he whispered, but even as denial left his lips, recognition dawned in his eyes. Ethan, who had been watching this exchange intently, looked between his father and Gabriel with new understanding. His hands moved in a question directed at Lucia. Underscore, he's my cousin. Underscore. Lucia nodded once, her expression grave. And as 500 of New York's wealthiest citizens looked on in stunned silence, the truth that Conrad Blackwood had buried beneath 15 years of ruthless ambition and calculated cruelty began to surface. A truth about a brother erased from family photos, about wealth built on betrayal, and about a child abandoned to the streets while his uncle lived in opulence. A truth that his deaf son, whom he had dismissed as broken and incomplete, had somehow recognized in an instant, seeing in Gabriel's eyes the reflection of his own isolation in a world determined to look away. Hey everyone, I'm absolutely blown away by your incredible response to this story. Where are you watching from today? Drop it in the comments below. If you're as intrigued as I am about what happens next between Conrad, Ethan, and Gabriel, make sure you hit that subscribe button. You won't want to miss how this powerful family drama unfolds. What do you think happened to Conrad's brother? Share your theories below. Everyone out. Conrad's voice cut through the stunned silence. The event is over. Murmurs of confusion rippled through the crowd as security began ushering Manhattan's elite toward the exits. Conrad maintained his rigid posture until the last guest departed, leaving only his son, Lucia, the homeless boy, and a handful of staff in the vast ballroom. My office. Now. He turned on his heel, not waiting to see if they followed. Ethan took Gabriel's hand, his bare feet padding silently across the marble. The homeless boy limped slightly, his cuts leaving faint red smears that the cleaning staff would later scrub away as they did all evidence of unpleasantness in the Blackwood mansion. Lucia walked behind them, her spine straight despite the weight of what she had just done. After 15 years of loyal service, she had shattered the careful walls Conrad had built around his past with 7 simple words. He is your brother's son. Conrad's office occupied the east wing of the mansion, a temple to power with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park. He stood behind his desk, a fortress of Brazilian rosewood between himself and the truth he'd spent years burying. "Explain yourself," he demanded as Lucia closed the door behind them. "Perhaps the boys should wait outside," she suggested quietly. The boys stay. Conrad's gaze fixed on Gabriel, studying him with cold calculation. "You made a spectacle of my family in front of half of Manhattan's donor class. You don't get to dictate terms now." Ethan watched this exchange with the hyper-awareness of a child who had learned to read emotions rather than words. He guided Gabriel to a leather sofa against the wall, positioning himself protectively between the homeless boy and his father. "How long have you known?" Conrad asked Lucia, his voice dangerously soft. 3 weeks, she replied, her hands reflexively forming the signs that accompanied her words, a habit developed for Ethan's benefit. "I saw him sleeping in the park across from St. Michael's where I volunteer." The resemblance was undeniable. Conrad's jaw tightened. "And instead of coming to me privately, you chose to announce it at my biggest fundraiser of the year." "I tried," Lucia countered, a rare flash of anger breaking through her professional demeanor. 3 times I requested to speak with you about an urgent personal matter. 3 times your assistant said you were too busy." Ethan's hands moved in a question directed at Lucia. Why was Gabriel in the park? Conrad caught the motion from the corner of his eye. "English, Ethan. In this house, we speak English." For the first time in years, Ethan's voice emerged, rusty from disuse, each word clearly painful to form. Why was he there? The sound of his son's voice, mechanical and strained from years of forced speech therapy, froze Conrad momentarily. Ethan almost never spoke aloud, especially not when signing was an option. In the silence that followed, Gabriel pulled something from inside his ragged jacket, a worn photograph, its corners soft from handling. He held it out, his hand trembling slightly. Conrad made no move to take it, so Lucia stepped forward, accepting the photo and placing it on the desk between them. The image showed 2 young men in their 20s, arms slung around each other's shoulders, identical grins beneath different colored eyes. Conrad's icy blue, his brother Michael's warm brown. The Manhattan skyline stretched behind them, still featuring the twin towers that dated the photo to before 2001. "Michael died 10 years ago," Conrad stated flatly. "Drug overdose in some filthy SRO in the Bronx. I identified the body myself." "Michael died 8 months ago," Lucia corrected gently. "Of pneumonia, in a homeless shelter on East 117th Street. Gabriel was with him." Conrad's composure slipped. "That's not possible. I saw him. In the morgue." "You saw someone?" Lucia agreed. "But Michael survived that overdose. He got clean, Mr. Blackwood. He was clean for nearly 9 years." Ethan slid from the sofa and moved to the desk, reaching for the photograph. He studied it intently before signing to Lucia. "That's the man from the drawings under my pillow." Lucia nodded, her eyes never leaving Conrad's face. "I knew Michael before I came to work for you, Mr. Blackwood. We met at the shelter where I volunteered after coming to this country. He taught English to immigrants there. That's how I learned." Understanding dawned across Conrad's features. "He sent you here to spy on me." "He sent me here to watch over his nephew," Lucia corrected. "A child he never met because you didn't tell him Ethan existed." The accusation landed with precision, striking at the heart of secrets long buried. Conrad's hands flattened against the desk, knuckles whitening. "Michael forfeited any right to this family when he stole from our parents' estate," he said coldly. "When he betrayed my trust and nearly destroyed Blackwood Industries before it had even begun." Gabriel flinched at Conrad's tone, though he couldn't understand the words. Ethan noticed, returning to sit beside him on the sofa. With careful movements, he showed Gabriel the sign for safe, then pointed to himself and to Lucia. "Michael didn't steal anything," Lucia said, her voice steady despite the danger of challenging Conrad Blackwood in his own domain. "He discovered your father was laundering money through shell companies tied to the family foundation. He threatened to go to the authorities if your father didn't stop." "Convenient lies from a dead man," Conrad dismissed. "My father built this company with legitimate investments and strategic acquisitions." "Your father built this company with blood money from arms deals to sanctioned regimes," Lucia countered. "Michael had proof. The same proof Gabriel brought with him tonight." Conrad's gaze snapped to the homeless boy. "What proof?" In answer, Gabriel reached into his threadbare jacket again, this time removing a small USB drive attached to a frayed lanyard. He held it protectively against his chest, uncertainty and fear evident in his posture. "What's on it?" Conrad demanded. Ethan's hands moved rapidly, signing to Lucia. Asterisk, he's scared. Tell father to stop shouting. Asterisk, Mr. Blackwood, Lucia said quietly. Gabriel has been living on the streets since Michael died. He came here tonight not just for food, but because Michael's last words to him were to find you, to give you what's on that drive. And what exactly is that? Redemption, Lucia answered simply. A chance to right the wrongs that destroyed your brother and orphaned his son. Conrad's laugh was brittle. Redemption? Michael abandons his responsibilities, vanishes for 15 years, apparently fathers a child. And now I'm supposed to clean up his mess? Again, Michael didn't abandon anything, Lucia said, her voice hardening. He was driven away. By you. The accusation hung in the air between them. Ethan watched his father's face intently, cataloging the micro-expressions that flashed across features normally kept under rigid control. Guilt, anger, and something that looked disturbingly like fear. That's not what happened, Conrad said finally, but the certainty had left his voice. Ethan stood suddenly, crossing to his father's desk. His small hands moved with unexpected authority. Asterisk, you're lying. Your eyes change when you lie. They always have. Asterisk, for perhaps the first time in his life, Conrad seemed genuinely at a loss for words, staring at his son as though seeing him clearly for the first time. Lucia translated Ethan's signs aloud, her expression grave. Your son deserves the truth, Mr. Blackwood. About his uncle, about his cousin, about the fortune built on secrets that's paying for this mansion. You've overstepped, Lucia, Conrad warned, ice returning to his tone. 15 years of service doesn't give you the right to question my family decisions. No, she agreed. But being the person Michael trusted to protect both children does. She straightened her shoulders, meeting his gaze without flinching. I made a promise to your brother as he was dying. I intend to keep it. Something shifted in Conrad's expression, a flash of the young man from the photograph, before wealth and power had hardened him into the ruthless figure who dominated boardrooms and charity galas alike. What exactly did my brother ask of you? He asked, his voice strangely quiet. Lucia glanced at the two boys sitting side by side on the leather sofa. One in bespoke formal wear with bare feet, the other in salvaged rags clutching a USB drive that could destroy an empire. He asked me to help you remember who you were before Blackwood Industries, she answered. The brother who taught him to ride a bike, who defended him against bullies, who promised to always protect him, no matter what. Conrad's gaze drifted to the photograph on his desk, to the two young men with matching grins and untroubled eyes. That was a lifetime ago. It doesn't have to stay in the past, Lucia said gently. A tense silence filled the office, broken only when Ethan slid from the sofa again, crossing to Gabriel with determined steps. His hands moved in the simple signs he'd seen Lucia teach earlier. Asterisk water? Food? Asterisk Gabriel nodded eagerly, copying the gestures with growing confidence. Ethan turned to his father, his small face set with an expression Conrad recognized from his own mirror. The Blackwood determination that had built and destroyed in equal measure across 3 generations. Without speaking aloud, Ethan signed with slow precision, making sure his father could follow each movement. Asterisk, he stays. He's family. Asterisk before Conrad could respond. Gabriel stood shakily, approaching the desk with the caution of a child who had learned harsh lessons about the mercurial nature of adults. He placed the USB drive on the polished wood surface and stepped back quickly, as though expecting punishment for his boldness. Conrad stared at the small device, no larger than his thumb, that somehow contained both indictment and opportunity, the ghost of his brother's final offering. What am I supposed to do with this? He asked, not looking up. What you should have done 15 years ago, Lucia answered. Listen to your brother. Ethan's hand slipped into Gabriel's, a silent promise between two boys separated by wealth, yet united by loss. His other hand formed a single sign, directed at his father with unmistakable clarity. Choose. And in that moment, surrounded by the trappings of the empire he had built, Conrad Blackwood faced the most significant decision of his life. One that would determine not just his legacy, but the future of 2 children who carried his blood. The choice between the power he had spent a lifetime accumulating and the family he had sacrificed to obtain it. Hey, incredible viewers. I'm absolutely loving your thoughtful comment from around the world. Where are you watching from today? If you're as moved as I am by Ethan and Gabriel's growing connection, make sure you hit that subscribe button. You won't want to miss what Conrad decides to do with the truth his brother left behind. Will he choose redemption or protect his empire at all costs? Share your predictions in the comments below. Conrad stared at the USB drive on his desk, the small device suddenly heavy with the weight of 15 years of carefully constructed lies. Outside his office windows, Manhattan glittered beneath a winter moon, indifferent to the drama unfolding within the penthouse that crowned its skyline. I want to see what's on it, he said finally. Ethan moved closer to Gabriel, their shoulders touching in silent solidarity. Lucia nodded once, retrieving the drive and inserting it into Conrad's computer with the careful movements of someone handling explosive material. The screen illuminated with dozens of folders, meticulously labeled and dated. Conrad clicked on the first one, labeled simply Origins. Financial statements appeared, followed by emails, contracts with names redacted, and finally, a video file. Conrad's finger hovered over it momentarily before he pressed play. Michael Blackwood's face filled the screen, gaunt but clear-eyed, a stark contrast to the healthy young man in the photograph. Behind him, a sparse room with peeling paint suggested the shelter where he'd spent his final days. Conrad. Michael's voice emerged from the speakers, steady despite his evident illness. If you're watching this, it means I've failed to deliver this message in person. It means I'm gone. Conrad's fingers tightened on the edge of his desk, his knuckles whitening. 15 years ago, I discovered what Father was doing with the family foundation, Michael continued. Arms deals with sanctioned countries, laundered through our charitable work. When I confronted him, he gave me a choice: silence in exchange for $20 million or exposure that would destroy the family name. Michael paused, coughing harshly before continuing. I refused the money, threatened to go public. That night, you came to my apartment with two men I'd never seen before. You told me I had 24 hours to leave New York and never return, or the evidence of drug use you planted would send me to prison for a decade. The office fell silent except for Michael's labored breathing from the recording. Ethan watched his father's face transform, the corporate mask crumbling under the weight of exposed truth. I never took a penny of the money, Michael continued. But you and Father made it look like I had. The perfect narrative, the troubled younger son, stealing from the family, disappearing with millions. Meanwhile, you built Blackwood Industries on the foundation Father created, expanded the same networks, continued the same practices. Conrad moved to stop the video, but Lucia gently caught his wrist. He deserves to be heard, she said quietly. After 15 years of silence. On screen, Michael leaned closer to the camera. I'm not sending this to punish you, Conrad. I've spent too many years angry, too many years lost. This isn't about vengeance. It's about Gabriel. At the sound of his name, Gabriel straightened, his eyes fixed on the uncle he'd never met and the father he'd never known, speaking to each other across time and death. My son deserves better than the streets, Michael said. And your son, yes, I know about Ethan, deserves the truth about his family. The drive contains everything: account numbers, transaction records, names of everyone involved in Father's network. Enough to dismantle everything if it goes public. Michael's expression softened, but it also contains another path. In the folder marked Restoration, you will find a complete plan to legitimize Blackwood Industries, to redirect its resources toward actual humanitarian work, to make our family name mean something beyond power and fear. The video paused as Michael coughed again, more violently this time. When he continued, his voice was weaker, but his eyes remained clear. I forgive you, Conrad, for all of it. Now you have a choice: protect the empire of lies or build something worthy of the children who carry our blood. I've always believed there was good in you beneath Father's influence. Prove me right. The video ended, Michael's face freezing on the screen, eyes that matched Gabriel's staring directly at Conrad with a gaze that seemed to bridge death itself. No one spoke for several long moments. Then Ethan's hands moved in a question directed at Gabriel. He was your father? Gabriel nodded, tears tracking clean lines down his dirt-smudged face. Ethan turned to his father, signing with deliberate precision. Asterisk, did you do what he said? Did you make him leave? Asterisk. Conrad looked at his son, really looked at him perhaps for the first time in years, and saw not the broken child he tried to fix with specialists and therapies, but a boy with moral clarity that cut through deception like a blade. Yes, he admitted, his voice barely audible. I did what my father told me was necessary to protect the company, to protect our future. His gaze shifted to Gabriel. I didn't know about you. I swear I didn't know Michael had a son. Would it have mattered? Lucia asked quietly. The question hung in the air between them, unanswerable yet demanding response. Gabriel reached into his pocket again, withdrawing a folded paper that he smoothed carefully before offering to Conrad. It was a childish drawing of two men, clearly Conrad and Michael from the photograph, but with two small figures added, one beside each brother. Conrad took the paper with trembling hands. What is this? Lucia translated as Gabriel signed with the simple vocabulary he'd picked up from watching Ethan. His father told him stories about his uncle, about a cousin he might meet someday. He's been drawing these since he was 5. Ethan peered at the drawing, then signed to Gabriel. You knew about me? Gabriel nodded, his hands forming clumsy approximations of signs. Asterisk, father said cousin. Like brother. Family. Asterisk. Conrad set the drawing beside the photograph on his desk. Past and present, reality and possibility laid bare before him. He turned to his computer, opening the folder labeled Restoration with a single click. Inside was exactly what Michael had described, a comprehensive plan to transform Blackwood Industries, to dismantle the illegal operations while preserving the legitimate business, to make restitution where possible without destroying everything. He spent years creating this, Conrad murmured, scrolling through the meticulous documentation. Even after everything I did to him. Michael believed in redemption, Lucia said simply. He wanted his son to know his family. All of his family. Conrad closed the folder and looked at the two boys. One raised in luxury, yet emotionally abandoned. The other denied everything, yet somehow carrying the same quiet dignity that had characterized his father. If I do this, he said slowly, if I implement Michael's plan, there will be consequences. Legal scrutiny, financial penalties, possibly criminal charges against certain board members, maybe even against me. Yes, Lucia agreed. Justice often comes with a price. Ethan's hands moved again. Will you go to jail? I don't know, Conrad answered honestly. Maybe. Ethan considered this, then signed again. Asterisk, but Gabriel would be safe? With us? Asterisk, yes, Conrad replied, something shifting in his expression, the first genuine softening Lucia had witnessed in 15 years of service. He would be family, as he always should have been. Ethan nodded once, decision made, and returned to Gabriel's side. With slow, deliberate movements, he taught his cousin the sign for brother, their hands forming the connection their fathers had lost. Conrad watched them. The empire he had sacrificed everything to build suddenly seeming hollow compared to the simple truth before him. Two children finding in each other what the adults in their lives had failed to preserve. Unconditional acceptance. What do I do now? He asked Lucia, humility replacing authority in his voice. You begin again, she answered, gesturing toward the boys. With them, Conrad rose from behind his desk, the barrier he had placed between himself and vulnerability for so long, and approached Gabriel. He knelt, bringing himself to eye level. With his brother's son, I can't undo what I did to your father, he said, knowing Gabriel couldn't hear the words but needing to speak them aloud. But I can try to be the uncle he believed I could be. Lucia translated this into sign language, her hands forming the bridge between worlds as they had for years. Gabriel studied Conrad's face with the careful assessment of a child who had learned to read intentions rather than trust promises. Then, with the simple directness of youth, he reached out and took Conrad's hand, placing it alongside Ethan's and his own, forming a circle of connection between the three remaining Blackwoods. No words were needed, spoken or signed, to recognize the covenant being formed. A promise to reclaim what had been lost, to rebuild not an empire, but a family. Outside, snow began to fall over Manhattan, covering the sharp edges of the city with a momentary blanket of white. Inside, Lucia watched as Conrad pulled both boys into an embrace, awkward at first, then settling into something genuine as Ethan showed Gabriel how to wrap his arms around his uncle's neck. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. It wasn't redemption, not completely. But it was a beginning. And sometimes, Lucia thought as she quietly slipped from the office to give the newly formed family privacy. Beginnings were more powerful than endings. Especially when they grew from truth finally spoken aloud, from compassion finding root in the most unexpected soil, and from children wise enough to see what adults had forgotten. That wealth meant nothing without connection. That power meant nothing without purpose. That no empire could ever replace the simple human need to be seen, to be known, to belong. In the morning, Conrad Blackwood would begin the complex process of dismantling and rebuilding his father's legacy. There would be legal battles, financial reckonings, public scrutiny of the most painful kind. But tonight, in the quiet of his office with snow falling beyond the windows, he had already taken the most important step, recognizing in a homeless boy's eyes the brother he had betrayed, and in his deaf son's hands the wisdom he had refused to hear. Sometimes salvation came from the most unexpected sources, from a maid who knelt to wash bleeding feet, from a child who chose to sign rather than speak, from a brother reaching from beyond death to offer not vengeance, but a path home. Hey everyone, I'm absolutely moved to tears by this powerful story of redemption and family healing. Where are you watching from today? Drop it in the comments below. If this journey of Conrad, Ethan, and Gabriel touched your heart, please hit that subscribe button. I share stories that remind us what truly matters in life. What was your favorite moment from this emotional family reconnection? Let me know in the comments.